Welcome to Get Wet with Cyree Johnson. This will be part of my Div 3. You can also call it Dykes and Dicks if you want. And today we'll be talking about sex and disability. Please disregard the fact that I'm wearing the same clothes. I'm not nasty, we shoot these two at a time. So, yeah. Don't talk about me, y'all. So today we're going to talk about physical and mental disabilities as well as chronic illness and their effect on sex and sexuality as opposed to their perceived effects on sex and sexuality. We're going to talk a little bit about stereotypes that insist that the disabled consist of a non-sexual, feeble, unattractive, and capable of sex population. I guess first we'll start with some definitions. The definition given for disability by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 is used in respect to an individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual, a record of such impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. 2. Major life activities are defined as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working. As you can see, this is an intentionally very large category, much larger than people often regard it to be. It also refers to people with impaired major bodily functions, which for the purposes of the American with Disabilities Act meant function of the immune system, like me, normal cell growth, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, and reproductive functions. So, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 had a very large effect on not just defining disability, but changing the way that America had to respond to the disabled, in the sense that decisions were made, hopefully, not at New Hampshire College, and grants were written so that buildings and institutions could become more accessible. And a critique of this is often that while things became more wheelchair accessible, although that's definitely not up to par, they didn't become accessible in other ways, and that institutions are not forced to make them accessible in those ways. But now we're going to go to a definition of chronic illness. Chronic illness is an illness that persists for a long period of time. A term chronic comes from the Greek term chronos, meaning time, and lasting a long time. These definitions of disability are made, supposedly, for the widest range of people to be covered under the Act. Yet, it still means that people have a very monolithic view of what it means to be disabled. I'm going to start that sentence again. But this definition of disability often means that invisible disabilities are constantly overlooked. Invisible disabilities are disabilities that are not immediately apparent. Yeah, okay, so let's see what a definition that was. For instance, a sitting disability, mobility issues, chronic pain, Asperger's syndrome, attention deficit disorder, brain injuries, chronic pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, chemical sensitivity, fibromyalgia, epilepsy, repetitive stress injuries, et al., et cetera, ad infinitum. Sorry. I guess I should just preface this by saying that disability is still kind of a topic that I'm growing more accustomed to speaking about in terms of my own life, and so I don't necessarily always have the same amount of comfort talking about it as I do with the other facets of my identity, which is an issue, particularly because explaining the functions of your invisible disability in bed is very awkward and subject to disbelief. So, sex and disability. Sorry. I'm going to take a moment to recenter myself. So today we're going to talk a little about the definition of disability, which I guess we just did. And then open it up to, I don't know why I'm feeling so awkward.
I need to go back and take everybody can get up and take 5 minutes or something.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't understand what's going on with me, y'all. This doesn't happen all the time.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. I guess what I'll just say to begin with is that the way that disability often correlates itself with sex is one of negation. When people recognize like the identity, like that one's identity has a component of being disabled, people often nullify one as a sexual being. So my fear with this episode is that in some way, whether it be liminal, subliminal, or superliminal, that having people recognize me as a disabled person who is running the show will negate what I'm saying. And that's a very strange fear for me to have. You know, like that's a very like deep and intimate, fear for me to have.
But I think the fact that you are doing this show means that you're doing something to change some of those persistent ideas about sex and disability. I think it's really great that you're doing this show and that you are a disabled woman and you can do it. Like, it's great.
It still makes it a kind of more uncomfortable territory than a lot of, there's no real place to talk about it on campus. So like there's not like a lot, I'm not really equipped as well. So I'm just gonna put out that disclaimer. And yeah, say a little bit about that. I guess I already did. Get a little awkward. So, one of the major issues in sex and disability, key topics and news articles center themselves around assistive technology. Assistive technology is modifications of existing technology to accommodate differences in need. For instance, like vibrators with longer handles, as far as sex toys are concerned. Or vibrators without handles at all, that just tuck into a pair of underwear or that can be worn strapped onto the body. So I guess I'm going to open up the floor for questions and comments about how we feel that disability correlates to sex, doesn't correlate to sex, becomes understood, both like mental and physical disability, which we'll talk about a little later, but if anybody has any opening comments on that.
Yes, I could open up specifically on assistive technology when it comes to sex, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know such technologies were available. It seems kind of natural that they would be, but because sex is still a taboo subject in general in a society, with the compound of disability, it's something that's very hidden and you wouldn't know about. I still don't know as much as I'd like to about it. I guess just the fact that something really put out there as an option, you know, because of that stigma that disabled people aren't really sexual, which is completely and totally, disturbing and, so the way we have it in the, not media, but information about it is awful.
I feel like the issue of sex and attraction and desire is what, for a long time, like kept me from coming out as disabled or like understanding myself or like coding myself that way, particularly to partners, because of the way that they respond, like, which is either like with disbelief, like, no, you're not disabled, like you're cute, you walk around, you know, like, which is also like a difficult thing about being chronically ill, that like having a chronic illness that is also a disability, because it's like chronic illness, it comes and it goes, you know, like that's the thing about chronic illness, but like also for a long time it kept me from using a cane, which is something that I need to not be in excruciating pain when I walk, in fear that it would like limit my choice of partner, you know, and that's like such a weird thing to make someone choose. It's like, are you gonna walk around normally or are you gonna get laid, you know, like that was, yeah.
I remember someone who was disabled when I started dating Sid. Someone who was disabled was like, how is that? How is that? You know, is it good? I was like, A, it's none of your business, and B, yes, it is good. Thank you very much. Like, like, just because someone's disabled doesn't mean that they are incapable of having sex. Doesn't mean they're incapable of having good sex. And in some ways it means they're more capable because they have to be more conscientious about it.
In the book Life on Wheels, the A to Z Guide for Living Fully with Mobility Issues by Gary Karp, it quotes a survey given at the Baylor College of Medicine in the Center for Research on Women with Disabilities. It drew responses from 475 women with disabilities and 406 able-bodied women. Margaret Nozek, PhD, the principal investigator of the study, says that they found women with and without disability had the same level of sexual desire, but women with disabilities experienced a lot of frustration and barriers in having sexual activities at the level that they wanted. They had trouble finding partners, and so the rate of marriage and living with a partner was much lower for women with disabilities. Ultimately, the study is reassuring. What you also found is that many women with disabilities have overcome the effects of those negative stereotypes and have found wonderful success in developing relationships, families, and satisfying lives. Now, the fact that even had to be written that way, I think highlights a lot of the stigma against the physically disabled in regards to sex, particularly when it isn't invisible and when it's not hidden. I think one of the most stark times of my life was partners' expectations of what sex should look like and what I'm actually able to physically provide. I once had a partner ask me to do a split in bed, which is something that I can now do, I would like to say. But it's only out of spite of that person. But that I learned how to do a split, interestingly. So thanks, person. If you're watching, you know who you are. Which you very well may be. I want that to stay in. But yeah, and I just remember that thinking to myself what an unrealistic expectation of what people are able to do in sex, disabled or not. Who are these people who do these splits on demand? Should I do a full cartwheel? Is that what you want me to do when I'm sucking your dick? I don't exactly. I don't see the correlation between my acrobatics and sexual performance. Especially interesting is the finding that disability is unrelated to the level of sexual functioning or satisfaction. Other factors were found to be the cause of limited dating, relationships, marriage, and childbearing options. I also think it's important to note that the way people see, sex is something that people talk about in their families so little and usually so late that a lot of times, depending on your race and your class, it might not be talked about at all. I remember when my mother did finally find out that I had lupus, and which she refuses to acknowledge. She told me disabled people don't leave home. They stay at home and they live with their family. And I think that that's a really interesting idea for the way sex would even look in that situation, But let's come back to that. Let's talk about some mental disabilities, huh? Yeah? Everybody ready for that? Medications, particularly antidepressants, can lower sex drive and make it a longer process to have an orgasm or eliminate orgasm altogether. In those cases, it's especially important to ask. I feel like doctors don't do a great job of communicating the way that medications affect sexual function. Thus often misleading people who are deciding whether or not to take medication about whether or not that'll be a viable side effect for their life, and allowing them to make a lucid choice in that situation, instead of just here, have this 60 milligrams of antidepressant and never have an orgasm again. Don't think, yeah. It's Alexa.